to high convert candidates, you need to give them a really positive experience and take away those barriers to entry along the way. One of the things you typically see is that a candidate will go to apply for a vacancy. Perhaps they'll see an advert, they're really excited by it, they'll go to apply, they'll jump onto the ATS and they'll attach their CV, and then they'll have this massive form asking them for their inside leg measurements and every other piece of information that is already on their CV. Often the really strong candidates are the ones who are being approached and headhunted. So, why would they then spend this amount of time going through that process when, they're probably getting 10 calls or 10 emails on LinkedIn a day?
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Tara O'Brien, who is a recruitment strategist and creator of the Hiring Success TA Development Program and head of resourcing at Oxford NHS Foundation Trust. During the episode, Tara shares how to create a high converting candidate journey. She shares her tips to create a memorable candidate experience, her 9-step hiring success framework, and how AI is transforming talent acquisition processes. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Tara, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.
So for context for everyone, last time we saw each other, we were building a Lego duck together. Which sounds like a really random. People are like, what? You joined us at our last HR Innovation Roundtable at Lego, so it's nice to see you again, and thanks for making the trip over.
No, it was amazing. It was one of the best trips this year so far. So loved it. Loved every minute of it. It was a great facility, and the speakers and the sessions were brilliant as well.
I'm a bit jealous that your duck actually looked better than mine. My one didn't even resemble a duck. For everyone listening, we were all given the same set of bricks in the room, and we had to create a Lego duck, but with no instructions. Important part. So it was really interesting to see people's diversity of thought and creativity and what they came up with as well. So it was cool. Tell everyone a little bit more about your background and sort of journey to where we are now. Did you choose HR, or did it sort of choose you along the way?
I think I did choose it, but my background is always in, I guess, the talent acquisition side of HR, the resourcing side of HR. Initially in recruitment in an agency environment, started in that space about probably over 25 years ago now. So that's been my entire career. I've always worked in resourcing of one form or another. And then about my previous company, I was director in a medical devices, pharmaceutical, life science recruitment business. And so we had a lot of connection with the NHS, even though we didn't work directly with the NHS. We worked with customers who worked with the NHS. So I had I guess a desire to get to know that sector a little bit more. Also, wanted to go a bit broader than agency recruitment and see the other side and really get deeper into actual HR as opposed to just being on the surface, I suppose. And so I made the decision to leave agency and move to the NHS. And that was just over 4 years ago. And literally a couple of, about 3 or 4 months before the first COVID lockdowns hit. So it was a baptism of fire. So I moved to one NHS trust, which was about 14,500 staff. So one of the large ones, Oxford University Hospitals, which is the one connected to Oxford Uni. So it was a busy time there because during COVID there was research going on for a vaccine, etc. So we were not directly involved in the vaccine, obviously, but involved in the recruitment to back up and support it. I was then seconded to Oxford Health, which is the Community and Mental Health Trust, about 18 months ago, and ended up staying there. So I'm there now. So I guess, I've got a real passion for trying to help the NHS change the way it brings talent into an organisation. It's my second trust now, and I hope to bring some of the knowledge and ideas to other trusts as I move forward as well.
What would you say you learned from the agency side that has been really valuable now being in a practitioner role in the organization?
Lots, actually. To be honest, when I moved in-house first, I didn't know how much knowledge and experience I would bring because, effectively I'm now part of a HR team, and in fact I'm one of our heads of HR. So it's quite different. But I think it's those commercial skills. And when I say commercial skills, I don't mean the selling, your services to clients, obviously there is that, but the commercial skills in the way you consider and look at talent and the way you bring it into the organization and the way you develop relationships and nurture pipelines of prospective candidates for the future. That type of stuff is often not done very well in-house, and it's certainly not done very well in the NHS. I know there's some big organizations that do it brilliantly, but it's less common, and the NHS almost doesn't do it. And so, one of the things I'm trying to do is get us focusing on talent pools for the future. And when I say talent, I don't mean a set group of people that have a particular skill. I consider everyone to be a talent, because I just think there's a role for everyone. So when I say talent, I mean everyone.
Yeah, I love that, because we spoke offline around TA thinking commercially. What does that look like in a practical sense? If you was giving advice to one of your peers about how do you practically, tomorrow you're going to go in the office and you're going to do X. How do you practically start looking at TA for a commercial lens?
Well, one of the key things is to start building those pools of prospective candidates for the future. So, so often a really simple thing is a candidate might just be pipped to the post for a role that they've applied for. And actually that candidate, there might not be another role that's perfect for that person right now, but that doesn't mean that in 2 months' time there won't be. And if you don't have a strategy and tools to help you, retain that person, their skill, the knowledge of their skills, and two, keep in touch with them and keep some sort of an open relationship going. You're effectively just hoping that candidate will find an advert that you happen to put out again in a couple of months' time. And I always say to people, hope is not a strategy in recruitment. We can't depend on hope. We have to have tools in place to allow that person to find us, or us to find them, and be able to actively target them when we have a vacancy in a couple of months' time that suit that person perfectly.
Yeah, because it's such a waste. You've done so much time and you put so much time and effort in before that to build that relationship with them. So the fact that you just kind of completely just end it there is such a
it's a complete waste of resource for everyone. For the hiring manager, that there's usually, in the NHS, there's usually a panel involved of at least 3 people. So you've wasted an hour of 3 people plus the candidate's time plus the TA and the recruitment team's time for just to say to them, sorry, you've been pipped to the post. We would have hired you if we had 2 vacancies. And that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. On that point now, why is it so important to create a memorable candidate experience?
I think I mentioned to you briefly, I spoke at RecFest a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about a journey that I actually experienced myself. And so I talk about making it memorable for the right reasons. When I made the decision to move out of agency and into in-house, that was a very measured decision I made to do that. I went to talk to an organization that had been a previous client of mine, a very large organization in the medical device sector. Had lots of conversations with them, kept being told I was their preferred candidate for this particular senior talent partner role. And I stopped applying for other things because I was totally committed and totally bought into this organization. I liked their values. I liked what they stood for. I liked what they did. And the products they developed were really forward thinking. And so I stopped moving forward with my search to then literally about 2 months later be told that actually they decided to move forward with another candidate. And so what they've created there is as a candidate experience that was memorable for the wrong reasons, because even though I was bought in and I was committed to them, that mutual connection or mutual commitment wasn't there. And so I now would never go back to that organization. If anybody asked me if they should consider a role in that organization, I would probably say, really think, about that, because I certainly wouldn't recommend them, because from my perspective, it felt like they lied to me. And they gave me a really bad experience. So not only will I not go back to them, which for them, they're a big company, that's probably not the end of the world, but I'll also tell people, and people are much more likely to tell somebody else about a bad experience than they are about a good experience. So if we can make the candidate journey and the candidate experience memorable for really positive reasons, because the candidate, even if they were rejected, you can still do that in a positive, supportive way. You can let them know constructively, what they could have done differently. You can give them some really solid feedback to let them actually do something with that next time, so that they can go off and develop that skill or that attribute or whatever it is that effectively let them down at that time.
So in that occasion, they just sent you an email
about 3 months after this process started. So yeah, it was a pretty bad experience.
Later. Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few things there, but what are some of the other things that they could have done to make it a better experience for you?
Be honest was the key thing. I my background is in recruitment. I know that there may be other candidates in the process, and I had no problem with that. I'd rather they were honest with me, and at least then I could have continued to consider other things as well. But what they did was they chose to effectively lock me down for their purposes, knowing that I was really bought in and committed, stopping me for applying for other things. Not that they told me to stop, but because I was committed, I chose to stop, and they knew that. They knocked me back 3 months of looking for other roles. Now, I was in a situation at the time where that wasn't going to be a massive financial impact for me, but another candidate, it might have been.
No, of course.
So,
I know something you're also really passionate about is creating a high converting candidate journey. What does that mean? Could you walk us through that?
So the candidate journey, effectively starts from when the candidate becomes aware of the organization. And I always say it ends when they become an employee advocate. So they're working for the organization and they're advocating for the organization. They're telling people how great it is and how good their experience was, and they should come and work for them. So the journey for me is a lot longer than just application to start date. And so if you can, to high convert candidates, you need to give them a really positive experience and take away those barriers to entry along the way. So one of the things you typically see in the application process is that a candidate will go to apply for a vacancy. Perhaps they'll see an advert, they're really excited by it, they'll go to apply, they'll jump onto the ATS and they'll attach their CV, and then they'll have this massive form asking them for their inside leg measurements and every other piece of information that is already on their CV. Mm-hmm. And effectively what they're doing there is they're creating a barrier to entry. And we all know as soon as you create a barrier to entry, it puts people off and it stops people from applying. And often the really strong candidates are the ones who are being approached and headhunted. So, why would they then spend this amount of time going through that process when, they're probably getting 10 calls or 10 emails on LinkedIn a day asking them to consider other opportunities where they don't have those barriers to entry. And so what happens is the organization that puts those barriers in loses candidates, but they don't even know about it. They're not even aware that they've ever lost this brilliant candidate. And, another example like that is where people put in video interviewing right at the front end of the process. Now, I'm not a massive fan of video interviewing, but it has a place in volume recruitment, but later in the process. If you put it in as the first step before any engagement, then what happens is there's no commitment and there's no buy-in from that candidate. So they're asked to answer these questions to a one-way Zoom call effectively, and it puts people off. And so many candidates I've known who were brilliant for an organization just refused to apply because that was the first stage in their process. And so again, the organization just had no idea of the quality of candidates they were losing by putting a massive barrier in there in the start. So for me, the high converting journey is about making the barriers to entry as seamless as, not necessarily taking them out completely, but making them, putting them in for a reason, not putting in a CV and an application form, doing one or the other, thinking a little bit more cleverly. And so what that does is it means you're more likely to get candidates who actually come into the process and then stay in the process because it's not got all these blockers and barriers in it. And also to be high converting, you've got to have candidate engagement in there. So you've got to have probably a combination of automation used really well and in the right places, but also human touch points where you're allowing people to build that engagement with the person they're working with, whether that's the hiring manager or the team or the recruiter. But there's some opportunity for human touch points and human interaction to build that trust for the future.
You got to have that, especially if you, like you said, you got to have that before you ask me for a video.
Yes. Yes. You'd be amazed the amount of companies that they straight away, somebody applies, they go through that horrible application and CV, and then they get sent a link saying, record these answers to these 5 questions on this video, please, before we speak to you.
That's such a, like, as you said, especially for those in the high in demand talent, they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But what about the people that have, it's all right. It's okay if you're sending it to an extrovert. What about someone who's an introvert?
Yes.
You're asking them
Yeah.
to immediately go on camera, be
Yeah.
vulnerable, share in a medium that they're not really comfortable with, and they still might not get a reply.
Yeah.
What companies, maybe perhaps, or platforms, technology, ATS platforms, have you seen that do this best?
I have to say, I don't know if I've seen any that do it really well. I think ATSs are still a little bit lacking in that they're starting to build in CRM functions. Apologies, my
That's all right.
kitten that's
I
in the
love it. It's so
background.
cute. It just crawled out from the shelf, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, ATSs are still a little bit lacking in tools, like that. So a lot of ATSs are starting to build in CRM functionality to them, but they're still limited. And so to get those kind of results, to be able to do things like that really well, you almost have to have bolt-on tools, so
Okay.
bolt-on CRM systems and bolt-on onboarding tools and bolt-on L&D and things like that. So I don't know if there's doing anyone as yet that's doing it really, really well. There's a few that are moving forward
Mm-hmm.
with that.
What's the process that you've seen work best though yourself? In terms of the first 3 or 4 stages of that process. You've done it on both sides.
Yeah.
You've done it on, inside
Yeah.
an organization and as an external organization. What are the first 3 or 4 steps that really matter that you see?
Yeah.
Chris, this is how we set it up to work, to be the highest converting and less drop off and get the right people.
So the first step is about having the right employer brand, and that translates into a candidate value proposition. We talk about EVP all the time. I
Mm-hmm.
always talk about CVP, which is this, similar, but it's looking at it from an external perspective for the candidate looking into the organization. So you've got to have that value proposition. Your adverts have got to be used as an advertising medium and a tool for engagement. I think a lot of the time where people go wrong is they see their job description as basically an advert, and so they copy and paste a JD onto their advertising platform, and so it's not an advert. For me, an advert is a piece of marketing. It's a tool to attract people. It's not about giving them every piece of information about the job description. Absolutely, by all means, attach the job description to it, but the two things have very different functions. So having that candidate value proposition, having really good quality advertising that speaks to your ideal candidate. If it's not speaking to your ideal candidate, you're wasting your time, and you're wasting that that money, and you're spending that money on and that resource on advertising, which is not getting you the return you need.
What's the best way to do that? Do you bring in the hiring manager into that conversation with you and the team to make sure you understand the role more?
Understand the ideal candidate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a combination. So it needs the TA's skill and understanding of what we need to know to be able to get the advert out to attract the right people. But it also needs the knowledge and the functional skill knowledge from the hiring manager, and also the cultural knowledge from the manager, because what it's like in an organization. Yes, there might be an overriding culture that that is across the organization, but there's nearly always little microcultures within every team. And not that you're going to change everything entirely, but you've got to understand those microcultures to be able to get the person who is the best fit for that role. So understanding that ideal candidate profile is really critical. I think without that, you can't identify what platforms to advertise on or to reach out to candidates on. How do you know your candidates are on LinkedIn, for example, or are you just going to LinkedIn for everyone, or actually are your candidates on Facebook or Twitter or Threads, or where are they these days? Are they on TikTok? And then how are you speaking to them? And if you don't know your ideal candidate, again, you can't know how to speak to that person in a way that resonates with them, and they they hear the message and they think, yes, that's me, that advert is speaking to me. So you've got to get the ideal candidate profile right to before you do any of those things. I think sometimes hiring managers go wrong there. It's not that they don't believe it, it's just that they don't understand it in the first place. So there's that lack of knowledge, and so that comes all the way through. And if the TA team don't challenge them and don't help them and support them to identify that profile, then the TA team, you're just going along. You're not adding value to the process, which is sometimes why TA can get a reputation for being reactive and rather than proactive, because they're not doing those things to support the hiring managers.
It goes back to your point earlier about TA thinking commercially. I think that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
where they can be more
Absolutely.
commercial and have more impact, as opposed to just
Yes.
wait and be reactive. One of the things I came
Absolutely.
across on your profile was sort of your 9-step hiring success framework. What was that? One of those 9 steps?
Brand is a big part of that. Telling your story, so creating your story in the first place, so the organization, has a candidate value proposition and a story to tell, to get that out there. And then, part of the 9 steps is, so part of it's the visibility part, the advertising, the
Yeah.
recruitment, marketing, brand. Part of it, or 3 parts of it, should I say, of the 9 are around tools and functionality, and enabling your TA team with the right tools and support that they need to do the job effectively, and also teaching them to be commercial, teaching them the tools to do those things. It all pulls together to make it an effective team.
One of the struggles I hear from your colleagues is there's so many TA technologies, platforms popping up every day.
Yeah.
There's like a million. What advice or what questions do you ask when you're looking for a new TA platform?
No, it's a great question, and actually, I'm heading up a project looking at our ATS system at the
Yeah.
moment, and whether it's fit for purpose or whether we should be looking at other options. So we will go to market. So it's a great time to ask that question. For me, it's got to be user friendly, and the TA team are the team that spend all day every day on it. So generally speaking, even if it's not the most user friendly system at the back end, the TA end, they will learn it. That's not to say that it shouldn't be user friendly. It needs to be, but they will learn it because they're doing it all the time. The problem comes in at the candidate interface and the hiring manager interface. If your system's clunky at the hiring manager or the candidate interface, then you lose candidates, and hiring managers feel like their journey is very difficult, and they feel everything's a struggle. As much as the TA side of things needs to be good, I actually think the bigger focus for me is on the hiring manager interface and the candidate interface, to make sure that those are user friendly, are simple, they make the journey obvious, and the person feels like it's a positive journey, and it's not they're not going into a system and trying to figure out where to go next, because that does not create a positive journey.
What other considerations do you have?
Whether they have a CRM or some sort of CRM functionality, or where they're up to with developing that, because to keep, to build a talent pool, a pool of those prospective candidates, you have to also have a way of keeping in touch with them. And the only way you can do that is using digital marketing tools really well. So, bringing them onto your social platforms, and, sending them regular information, or podcasts or newsletters or white papers or information about the organization.
Keep
And
them
if you're
engaged.
not sending, yeah, absolutely, you've got to keep them engaged with content that's relevant to them. And I always, talk about, when you're building those talent pools, to segment them into, let's say, staff groups. I'm going to call them staff groups because that's what we call them in the NHS. So, for example, you have a segmented group of nurses and a segmented group of IT professionals, and you're not going to send them both the same content, because they'll be interested in very different things. You might send white papers about developments in nursing to the nursing cohort that you're developing a relationship for the future. You might send the IT people something entirely different, which talks about the developments in IT and digital in the organization, because you're trying to keep them engaged on the projects coming up. But you're not going to send them all the same stuff, otherwise you won't engage them. So you've got to speak to them in their own language.
I'm so with you on that one. It goes back to your point earlier. If you have had people in the pipeline before that haven't, perhaps they wasn't chosen for the role, but you still want to keep them engaged, you need to make sure you're doing that, especially when there's the sort of the war on talent and everyone's fighting for them. You're the organization that they're seeing as thought leaders that are, upskilling, helping them develop. They're going to go to you next time they're looking for a new role, right? And there's a lot of work that goes into it, like you're saying, but it's really, really important. And also, I'm saying that's where the kind of role of AI comes into it as well. You can use that, and also, if you do happen to post for a new position in there, it can use AI to search through your database and say, hey, have you thought that Chris could be a good fit for this role as well? So if you don't have that CRM in place, then you kind of miss all of those things. Yeah,
absolutely.
Seems like an obvious requirement. It's like a must-have, to be honest.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the market's slow to adopt it.
I'm so surprised when you said that. When you said the CRM, my first response was, "Don't they all have that?"
That's not obvious.
No, it's not. Okay.
They don't. Unfortunately, they should. For me, every ATS should have a really well-functioning CRM plugged into it.
Yeah.
But they don't.
you've been in this space for a long time in the TA space. What are some of the misconceptions you think that people have around TA?
I think sometimes the business doesn't see the role that TA plays in the organization. That's partly often the fault of TA because they're not aligning what they do with the business. Again, it goes back to that thinking commercially. They're not always thinking, what does the business need from us, and so what can we deliver to the business. And that probably again comes back to the TA leadership of helping their team become commercial and helping them think commercially. I think there's definitely limitations there because the business, there's a disconnect between the two. I think also there's issues around training hiring managers and developing those hiring managers, because they play such an important part in the recruitment process, and often they have almost, sometimes they have almost no training, and they're expected to go and interview and select and do that inclusively and all of these, and even write adverts, without any training and development or guidance even on those areas. So I think probably quite fairly, TA is seen as not helping those managers develop. And that's probably quite fair, because I think there's so much more we can do as a function to develop and support our managers.
Yeah, I wish I had that support when I was a manager. I still struggle with that now, actually, to be honest. As well, I could use all the help I can get. I feel like my go-to is now ChatGPT helping me out in terms of writing job applications and doing that stuff like that. But I wish I had someone in the TA team in the past that could help me and guide me, because that's not something you're trained. As a manager, it's not part of my managerial training or leadership training.
No, I think it's pretty typical. In the NHS, typically they get some management training, but very little around recruitment or how to onboard people and how to do that effectively. And even if they do, it's just the practical skills of, these are some example interview questions. This is how you score a candidate. This is how you make an offer. But they don't really go into, again, the engagement side or the nurturing a relationship from offer to onboarding to, i.e. to start date, is often one of the biggest times where candidates can get lost. You can lose candidates in the process because often, the TA function or the hiring managers just don't keep in touch with them. And of course, that's at the time where they're resigning from their current role. They've got their manager, if they're well regarded, saying, don't leave, stay with us, counter offering. And so, you've got your family and friends saying, well, why are you leaving? That organization have really looked after you. You've got your colleagues saying, don't leave us, stay with us. And so it's such a risky time for losing people, yet our onboarding processes are really limited. The person gets their offer, they might get the odd phone call between then and their start date, but actually that's only if it's a good team, a good TA team.
Where do you see the biggest opportunity for companies, or what are things that companies should be doing to retain employees?
I guess first of all, doing what they said they would do, because that's one of the biggest areas. Where the psychological contract is broken, where in the hiring process, the candidate was told certain things or led to believe certain things. Those expectations were set, and if those expectations aren't met in that first, probably 6 to 12 months, you've got again a disconnect there, and that's where you often have people leave quite quickly. And typically, candidates, you lose more candidates, or should I say, employees, in the first 12 months of working for an organization, and that's often why the expectations weren't met, or the job was not what they were sold. So there's usually a break in expectation there. So if we can change that and meet those expectations, then we'll probably retain people at least past 12 months. And then after that, it's about continuing to develop them and continuing to do what we said we're going to do, and have those performance development meetings and things like that. And I hate the word performance development review, because it implies that it's all about reviewing your performance and what you're doing, and it should be much more about, let's talk about your future development.
Everyone sees it as a negative conversation. It should be a very exciting, positive, energizing conversation as well. A lot. I've seen a few articles recently on LinkedIn around, will AI replace recruiters? It keeps coming up over and over again. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's hilarious that the question's even being asked, because we've had technology for we've had technology for years. It's never replaced us yet, because you'll never replace a human. And I think the smart TA functions are the ones who will adopt AI and tools as quickly as possible in the right way. As I said, you can use tools really well, or you can use them really badly. So like putting a video interview at the start of the process is a bad way of using it, but put a video interview at a different part of the process, it might be a good way of using it. So it's about using AI for the tool in the places that it's appropriate. And using it really cleverly. It's great for doing things like rewriting an advert to make it more exciting and engaging based on an ideal candidate profile. You can literally ask it to give it a job description, and I part of my training program that I do is around using those kind of tools.
Nice.
Plug in your job description, give it a really good quality prompt to say, I want you to write this into a short advert that's going to really inspire this ideal candidate profile. Tell it the profile, and it will come up with something. And it might not be the finished product, but it's saved you probably an hour, and you can just tweak it and personalize it.
Yeah, you're right. I feel like it's going to more so be a tool to empower recruiters and help. Again, it's their recruiter's own co-pilot. They've kind of got a number two that can go help them get 70%, 70%, 80% of the way, and then you kind of tweak it to the profile, and it allows them to spend more time on meaningful conversations and work, as opposed to the admin side, if that makes sense.
When people ask me about it, I explain it as a really good quality assistant that's very fast. They're really speedy, but actually you need to check things, and you need to sense check it, and you need to humanize it, and then yes, you try and get it to help as much as possible with that admin, and you do the functions that need a human. The conversations, the building relationships, the nurturing that need that human interaction, and we'll never replace that. I think if recruiters are worried about that, they're probably not doing the job right in the first place.
It's normally the case, right? So, yeah. Where do you see the future of TA? It's evolved so much in the time that even in the short time I've been around doing it. Where do you see it evolving to in the future?
Yeah, it's hard to know, isn't it? I think it will become more human interaction. I actually think we're going more down the path where people want to deal with a person, and they don't want to talk to bots, or they might do it for the practical. So I think where things like tools like a bot comes in is where it's just a practical question like an FAQ, or you want something quick and fast, then you're happy to speak to a bot. But actually, if it's anything more meaningful, you want to deal with a person. And so I think TA is going to move away from those high volume ATS systems that do everything automated for you. And actually, we use the tools for those practical things, but we use our people and our human resource where we need human interaction, and where we need people to build relationships. And so I think it's going to become more human.
I agree. I think it's going to free us up, as I said, to have more of those meaningful human conversations. Listen, before I let you go, where can people reach you? Where can I reach out to you? You've got some great resources on LinkedIn and other areas that I've seen before. Yeah,
I try to blog every couple of weeks and try to post useful content as much as possible, but time sometimes gets in the way. LinkedIn is my main platform. That's where I probably hang out if I'm going to be on social.
Nice. And the assessment that I saw, is that on your website, or is that a link to the assessment directly?
It's a separate tool. It's a really good survey tool, actually, where people can look at their candidate journey, and it will ask you some questions and help you identify the areas that you can develop in the candidate journey. It's on my LinkedIn profile, and it links to a separate platform.
Amazing. Well, let's send everyone there. Tara, so make sure you go and connect with Tara on LinkedIn, and also I'll definitely take time to have a look at the tool as well, and give you some practical steps to take from here. But apart from that, it was great chatting to you. Let's not leave it so long next time. I feel like it was good to see you at LinkedIn, and it's great to see you at the next event. And I wish you all the best of everything until we next speak.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I look forward to catching up again.